point, we're going to start the first panel. Rao is one of our panelists whom you know, and then we will turn to Dr. Carolyn Wynn. She's a director in Microsoft's Technology Policy Group, which is responsible for policy initiatives related to data governance and personal data management. And her work is focused on helping to shape relevant long-term technology policies globally in these areas by engaging with stakeholders and raising awareness of potentially disruptive impacts of emerging technologies, such as big data, AI, the Internet of Things, and the like. She's held a number of positions as well with companies like RIM and Avaya, Lucent, and Bell Labs. She received her PhD from the Center of Telecommunications Research at Columbia and finished as well executive business management programs at Harvard Business School and London Business School. Dr. Wynn, thank you very much for being here. Additionally, we have David Cox here, who is the IBM director of the MIT IBM Watson AI Lab, which is a first of its kind academic industry collaboration between IBM and MIT. And it is focused on fundamental research into artificial intelligence. The lab was founded with almost a 250,000 10-year commitment from IBM, and it brings together researchers at IBM with faculty at MIT to help tackle hard problems at the forefront of AI. Before joining IBM, David was the John L. Loeb Associate Professor of Natural Sciences and Engineering and Applied Sciences at Harvard. He was also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard Law School and is an agenda contributor at the World Economic Forum. And in looking at the resumes of these two, I'm sharply keen of my own limitations and will try to moderate the discussion as best I can. And Carolyn and David, if you wouldn't mind joining us on the panel, that we can get started. So I thought we might kick things off with some opening remarks from each of the two of you. I think Rao's given us a very compelling presentation and helped us frame our thinking about these issues. And feel free to dive deeper in any way you see fit. Please do.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman Pai, for the introduction and also for enabling us to be a part of this really fascinating discussion here, and also for the wonderful, to Rao, if I may call you that, for the wonderful intro to AI. I just want to make 4 very short points. To your point, Chairman, about the need to understand these emerging technologies much better by everyone involved, or maybe involved in any sort of a governance or policy or regulatory aspect. Completely agree. With my technical background, that's what I do. What I say is I speak 2 languages, right? Technology and policy. And that translation is really, really important. So to that light, in terms of the 4 points, the first one I want to start out with is to build upon a little bit in terms of AI's ability to enhance our capabilities, because at the end of the day, it starts with all of us. And, the notion is that, therefore, AI can help us to establish better insights and empower all of us to create better solutions, transform whatever it is that we're doing into much better than what we were doing before. The way at Microsoft we look at it as AI sharing additional intelligence and insights to make us go to that next level. It is about empowerment. It is about helping us to solve society's biggest challenges. We've got 2 applications that we're demoing here, and one of the things I want to go directly to your point about bridging the digital divides, which is, so the example here, we start with the concept that a farmer who knows the temperature, pH, and moisture level of his farm will be able to make much better decisions in terms of when to plant, how much to water, and what to plant. So in the U.S., 20% of people living in rural areas don't have access to even as slow as broadband speed. So in working together with Dancing Crow Farm in Carnation, Washington, what we've done is to build out, enable them to have access to broadband through a technology called TV Whitespace, and build up a very cheap infrastructure, which is solar powered, that enables that farmer to collect soil condition, moisture condition, how the farm is doing, the crops, etc., send that information back to a server that can analyze this using existing climate data, etc. So the end result is that that farmer is now using 30% less water and 44% less lime to control soil pH. So that's sort of one area in terms of how we see AI's potential. To realize this potential, we absolutely believe that we need to make AI human-centered. What this means is to amplify human ingenuity with intelligent technology. What that means is to couple what AI is really good at, which Rao has really made an excellent presentation on, which is learning patterns and developing insights from large data sets, with what humans are really good at, which is creativity, empathy, fairness, judgment, and collaboration, right? How do we actually figure out what is the problem statement? Trained as an engineer, that's the first question. What is the problem statement? And humans are really good at doing that. And then how can you use, what is the capability of the AI that can be used to help solve that problem? Thirdly, to realize AI's true potential, what that means is enable its broad adoption. It's got to be trustworthy. And I think you made that point very well. And at Microsoft, we published a book earlier on this year called The Future Computed, where we lay out what are the 6 principles to make AI trustworthy. We use the word trustworthy in terms of ethics because ethics is very much of a social cultural construct that is very context dependent. And those principles include, to your point, fairness, or I should say lack of bias, privacy and security, safety and reliability, inclusiveness, but also mechanisms to address and identify those things in terms of transparency and accountability. For the conversation today, I want to emphasize primarily inclusiveness, which gets back at the chairman's comment with respect to enabling and extending opportunities to those who don't have those opportunities before. What does that mean? How can AI empower everyone, regardless of age, ability, or language, by creating opportunities, redefining their lives in terms of making them socially more integrated, better integrated into societies, and are professionally integrated by being better integrated into the workplace. For those of you who are old enough to have read Douglas Adams' Guide to the Galaxy, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, remember the Babel fish, right? Those things that you put in your ears that allows you to understand every intergalactic languages out there. Well, that's kind of what seeing AI does, if you want to go look at it, right? That's what AI enables you to do, and that's that perfect example of human-centered and augmentation. At Microsoft, those are the kinds of applications that we want to emphasize, and we don't know what each of you individually have the ingenuity to do. So what we want to do, again, is, for example, we launch a program called AI for Good Initiative, which is a $115 million program over 5 years, and AI for Accessibility is a part of that, to reach out to subject matter experts to say, hey, if you have these insights, if you have this computational intelligence, how would you use it to address accessibility issues? Right, so that's one of the programs that we have out there. So we all need to work together to shape this future. It doesn't just come out. And I think this reinforces the point from the chairman has made and also that Rao has made. It won't just happen. We need to work together to drive the development of AI to be human-centered, trustworthy, and truly able to empower people. AI is not just a problem, it is also a part of the solution. And to that point, I think that's why we're here, and that's why we really, really appreciate the opportunity to just say we need to understand this technology better. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Carolyn, for those comments. And if I might, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Chairman, for inviting me. I'm a recovering academic, and as Rao mentioned, academics crave a willing audience. I would just modify it and say that the willing part isn't actually all that important, so thank you all for coming and listening. I just want to emphasize a few things that Rao said and put a slightly different framing on it. As a recovering academic, I would say actually before 2017, This whole forum's about AI. My business card actually says AI on it in 2 different places. But before 2017, we were actually really uncomfortable saying the term AI. We really desperately wanted to call it machine learning or deep learning, particularly in the academic community. And I think in 2018, we all kind of gave up, and we're all calling it AI, and we're really embracing that. But when I came to IBM, which is my first foray into a big corporation, they had done something really nice, which I really like, and I think it frames the discussion in an interesting way. They put adjectives in front of AI to distinguish what we have today, which is narrow AI, tremendously powerful, disruptive. If it solves your problem, it's amazing, but it's limited in fundamental ways. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have general AI, this idea that, Elon Musk has, that we're going to have systems that become conscious and self-aware and they're going to take over the world or whatever. When IBM internally thought about when that might happen, we came up with a number 2050 and beyond. And when you ask scientists when something's going to happen and they tell you 2050 and beyond, that means we have no idea, but it's really far away. But what's in between those 2 parts of the spectrum, I think, is really what we're talking about today, and that's the stakes. And we call that broad AI. So what will it take to have AI be broadly applied across many different, basically every corner of enterprise? And I think there's a couple key things we need to build. And the lab that I run, which is, again, it's a joint lab between MIT and IBM. It's founded with a $250 million investment over 10 years from IBM to usher in broad AI. And what we need, several things. One is we need systems that can learn from small data. So as much as we talk about big data, actually, many enterprises, many problems don't have big data. So the 200 examples of dogs, there are many problems that just don't have that. In the limit, think about a network intrusion attack. If you want to have AI figure out that somebody's trying to break into your network, you're not going to get 10,000 examples of that network intrusion. The first time it happens, it's happened, right? You don't get any training data before that. Likewise, when my daughter learned what a cat and a dog were, I didn't sit down with her with flashcards and say, cat, 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 dog, dog, dog. She saw one cat. She looked at a dog and said, hey, kitty. And like, no, honey, that's a dog. Boom, she's got it, right? So we have this ability ourselves. We need to replicate that ability to get it into every corner of the enterprise. But even more than that, a big part of the technology transformation that's coming, and I think every organization, every enterprise recognizes that AI is going to transform how you do business. That's as much a people transformation as it is a technology transformation. So not only is technology going to change how you do business, how government does business, how nonprofits do business, it's going to change the way we work, which means that the technology has to meet us halfway. That means it needs to be explainable. We need to understand. We need to trust why it's making those decisions. It needs to be fair. It needs to be unbiased. That's going to, as Rao, I think, beautifully said, that forces us to hold a mirror to ourselves and really ask, are we unbiased to begin with? What does it mean to be unbiased? What does it mean to be fair? These are actually really complicated questions. And I think AI has the potential, as we build these technologies, to do this in an automated way, to help us as a society figure out what we mean in the first place. So we need systems that are explainable. We need those explanations to be correct. It turns out that there's a danger as we build explainable AI that we build systems that make explanations, but those explanations might not actually be true. So one time I came into the kitchen and there was a broken cookie jar on the floor, and my daughter had a beautiful explanation for why that was true. It just turned out it wasn't correct. So we need to build AI systems that can actually be fundamentally interpretable, and this idea of causation versus correlation comes into that. So if you really understand the causal structure of what's happening, that's one way that you can get systems that are intrinsically interpretable, and that's something we're very much investing in the lab I run. And then the last piece I just want to highlight is a notion of infrastructure, which also Rao brought up, which has been intimately woven into the fabric of this AI discussion from the very beginning. I will also note, there was a comment that the term AI came in the 50s from a workshop at Dartmouth. That was actually a workshop that was organized by an IBMer, Daniel Rochester, who was building the first practical computer, the IBM 701, and future MIT professors, including Marvin Minsky and Claude Shannon. So we've been together since the beginning. But infrastructure has really been an important part of this, right? Like, what are the machines we're building? And currently, the machines we're building, are causing significant harm in the long run to the planet Earth. So by some estimates, just the power consumption of computing, if it keeps on its current track, by some estimates by the year 2040, will exceed the power budget of the planet Earth. So there won't be enough solar radiation coming from the sun, there won't be enough stuff we can dig up out of the earth and burn to actually keep up with how much computing we're doing. And that's even if you leave Bitcoin aside. So AI is going to need to become lower power. We're going to need to think about new computing architectures. And this is a tremendous opportunity because as we lower the power consumption of these devices, that means we can have vastly more power available in the cloud, but we can also have power available, AI, intelligence available at the edge. And that opens up a whole new spectrum of different applications. And this is, again, something we're working on, looking at new analog computing architectures that could perhaps reduce the power consumption of AI by 100 or 1,000 times. We're also looking at quantum computing, which is an area where IBM has a really strong leadership position, and asking how can AI and quantum interact with each other. So we're taking this broad view that really to get AI everywhere and to allow AI to augment what we do, we really need to break down these barriers, and I think that's a discussion that we need to all have together. That's a discussion where every stakeholder has to come to the table, technologists, policymakers, the community, and we need to decide together how we're going to make sure that that revolution comes to life, and comes to life in a way that serves us all. Thanks.
Thank you. So if I might start off our discussion with a very government-centric question, since we are, after all, here in a government building. You've given some very interesting perspectives, and I think you've identified some very interesting pressure points, if you will, with respect to AI. Now, I made in my remarks the general principle that we should view these emerging technologies with some restraint as a government, let them develop organically. But how would you respond to the argument that, well, look, if the AI module that we're talking about is only as good as the data that's being fed into it, if that data is essentially replicating the existing biases in the real world, then we have a problem. Or if the function or the purpose of the AI module is something akin to what you were talking about in China, we might have a problem. Or even things, as David was pointing out, if the power consumption of these AI tools is out of whack, then we have a problem. So would you agree with or then modify the statement I made that we should generally be hands-off as regulators and as policymakers on these emerging technologies, or is there a more active role for government, would you say?
So I mean, I think just what I meant to basically say is that there are two different types of regulation. One is regulating what kinds of technologies are being developed. That I don't think the time is right at all for government. In fact, I think people in AI research don't completely understand what things will work and what won't, and so that certainly would be the wrong thing to regulate. But some of the uses of the technology are becoming mainstream enough that ensuring that the data that a company is using has some sort of a certifiable diversity characteristics, that it actually is representative of the world in which this system is being used. That is something that is reasonable to look into. And again, as I said, ensuring that there is a sort of a democratization of access so that many new technologies will develop. So I want to put in perspective the fact that for the longest time, the people working on neural networks weren't given a red dime by anybody, because it was a technology that was given up for dead, so much so that the people working on it went to Canada. Okay, so what the reason for that, basically the reason I bring this up is, if we know how things are going to work, then we would have kind of engineered the future long back. I think the best thing is to allow basic research to be regulated by the science organizations. But the government does have, I think, a reasonable role in terms of ensuring access and ensuring that the data being used is diverse for the application that they're using.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. I want to build upon this point here. I think the fourth point that I was making in my remarks is that we all have a role in making sure that this technology is going to be developed in a way that maximizes its potential with the recognition of what the risks are. And I think that so from the perspective of identifying the risk, and I think David made the same point, which is all of us really needs to be at the table to try to identify what those risks are. Bias is one, or identifying potentially bias, making sure that the systems will work in a way that is safe and reliable, is another one, et cetera. We can go down the list. However, does that mean that there needs to be regulation in all of these things? I don't think so, and let me qualify that by saying that there is a governance framework that needs to be put into place, and the first part of that governance framework is to ensure that technology can maximize its potential, and in mitigating that, there are best practices that can be in place when these technologies are adopted in each of the different sectors. And this is where the sectoral conversations will become very, very important, because we don't know how these technologies will be deployed. That will be up. So I think that's why we form organizations such as PAI to make sure that we can share best practices. Standards organizations has a role in this conversation as well, in terms of identifying what is AI, what's the AI system, what's the terminology, what's the reference model, are there potentially what I would call risk management system and processes that should be put in place in a standardized way across the board. And then of course existing regulation applies, right? Just because this is a technology doesn't mean that existing regulations doesn't apply. So I think that we need to look at all of that. And then if there are specific harms, and for example, Microsoft has put out, our president has put out a blog to say, well, there are specific harms with respect to facial recognition, that there may need to be regulation. But again, that process really needs to be a multi-stakeholder process and consultation. So that's how I would look at this. One last point, which is something that Rao brought up, which is AI really, as a technology, can be a solution. So I think that that is one part where there needs to be additional investment into both, especially from a government perspective, into longer-term research, especially issues that are societal relevant that industry research may not be addressing, and that's a critical area.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to the existing discussion. AI is moving very fast. And when something is moving as fast as it is, I think what you're doing here at the FCC is exactly the right thing to do. I think using governments for its convening power to bring experts to have the discussion is incredibly important. And regulation early in the process can be problematic. It can be, even at the level of, you might think a priori that if we want to eliminate bias, well, of course, the thing we have to do is blind the systems to the protected variable. So we just need to make sure that the systems don't know what the race or the gender of the people it's making decisions on are. And there are shades of this in regulatory proposals and frameworks that are starting to emerge around the world. But that's exactly the wrong thing to do. And if you talk to people who are working on the front lines of building these technologies, in fact, you need to know these variables so that you can specifically build the system such that they can factor out those factors. So having that deep technical conversation so that we can work our way through these things, I think is going to be important, so that when we do regulate, that we end up regulating the right way. I also think that it's incumbent upon industry to self-regulate as much as possible, and I think IBM certainly has taken the position that we need to. These are key core concerns for us. We are working hard to build the technologies that solve these problems, and that together with across industry, we can start to define how we solve these problems before obviate the need for regulation to come in. So I think it's a tremendously exciting time. I think the potential is tremendously large, and if we can work together, governments, industry groups themselves, to define how to solve these problems, before they become problems, then I think we're going to get to a better place in the end.
Those are all great perspectives, and another general question I had, keying off some of David's previous work that I've seen, is focusing on this gap between humans and AI. And I think Rao mentioned this as well with some of the comments that have been raised, and Carolyn as well. The fears, the dark side of AI. Some seem to see it as a continuum, to borrow from pop culture, the Wall-E at the good end and the Matrix at the bad end. We're all going to be tools of these machines. But I'd be curious, David, on how you see the distinction there. What is it that makes humans irreplaceable? Can we, in fact, artificially recreate the brain, so to speak, with some of these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal for the near term is very much, and IBM's position, I think many companies' position is AI is here to make us better versions of ourselves, to augment us. To give us superpowers, right? Whatever your job is, and we see, in terms of labor markets, AI is not going to replace jobs; it's going to replace parts of jobs, going to change jobs. There's going to be a transition, and we think that's really important. Now, in terms of closing the gap, I think increasingly we're going to see AI systems that can do much of what humans can do. I mean, at some level, this is a kind of machine, and it does become an interesting conversation of what do we keep that's distinct for ourselves. And one question I think that came up earlier was sort of what do you tell your kids they should be when they grow up? And when I speak publicly, I get asked this question a lot, and I've given a lot of thought to it. And my answer is an autonomous vehicle personal injury lawyer. I think that is just anti-cyclical, it's just recession-proof. It's we will always need lawyers. But seriously, I mean, I think we're gonna emphasize more and more of the soft skills. We're gonna emphasize more and more leadership. I think there are many, I think there are many things that AI can't do today, and a lot of these discussions are a little bit premature. But I think the focus, I think the way we chart the path forward is that we really just keep a keen focus on asking how can AI work for us? How can AI make us better? Right. How can AI make us less biased? Right? People talk about AI being biased. How can we use AI to make us even better than we were natively? Because our human brains have sort of a native bias to them. So I think if we keep that focus in mind, we can get to a good place.
I think I would just add on to those questions to say, what is AI good at, and what is it not good at? What can't it do? And I think we need to be really focused on that. So let me, share a interesting story, right? When Ben Bernanke resigned, he made an application to do free financing for his home mortgage. So he was rejected because he didn't have a job that would cover the amount that he was asking for. So it was rejected. Now, I think that there's a story there, which is a very concrete story about what AI can do and what it cannot do, right? And to build upon the point that Rao had made, which is, AI looks backwards, right? How many of you have seen the wording from any sort of investment company that just says, performance in the past is no, assurance of performance in the future, right? AI is backwards looking. It's not going to be forward looking. And I think those are the things that human beings are good at. We have that overall context. And I think we really just have to keep on asking the question, what is AI good at and what can it not do?
So I don't know if it's probably a Freudian slip or something, but I couldn't help but notice that David mentioned that at least in the near future, IBM plans to keep the humans and augment them. That is actually worrisome to me. I know that he probably didn't mean it that way. If the question of can humans be replaced is a silly question. Who is making this technology? Us. Why would we want to make a technology that would replace us completely? And from a research perspective, AI already does extremely well on Mars. Okay, Rover and Spirit have been having great time on Mars. You know where they have trouble? With you and me. And you know why we have the brains the size that we have? Not to run away from the lions on the savannah, because that's where we all come from, but to actually deal with each other. So in fact, the real question is, can we make technology such that it would work with us as against some clumsy way replace us? And this is exactly, I think, the point I made in February when I gave my presidential address. That was my argument to the technical folks, that really dealing with humans is much more of a interesting research problem, because researchers are masochists. If it's not a hard problem, why would you want to work on it? And actually, working with humans is much harder. understanding the mental states, using intention projection, providing explanations, as David's daughter already figured out. Explanations are reconstructive. We are extremely good at making up explanations that will get us what we want. And understanding these issues really puts forward like a much more interesting future for AI. I think we should definitely use the existing things that the perceptual intelligence in AI can do, but I actually cringe when people talk about the AI as if it is one thing. It's a completely moving target. I hope that's the minimum that you got out of my talk, that in fact intelligences are multifaceted, and we basically are doing extremely well on one piece of it right now. I did also want to mention 2 more points. One is I think the reason I showed up here honestly is because I keep getting asked by other governments to show up and talk about AI, we did do, and in the US actually there was a lovely effort, I think in the previous administration, called Preparing for a Future with AI, where they essentially got huge number of the stakeholders and did a very careful study of how AI technology is going to impact the society. There's been a lull in that. I haven't seen that being picked up. So I'm very happy that it's again starting. And then finally, with respect to what should you tell your kids when they grow up, honestly, I would say this is going to be the great revenge of liberal arts. You know, all these history and English majors that we make fun of because they don't know how to deal with Excel spreadsheets. Excel spreadsheets are boring. Those are the kinds of things machines should be doing. We should be doing liberal arts education. I think, in fact, that's what is going to happen. Liars will be automated much before everything else.
As the lone humanities major in my rooming group, who was often the butt of those jokes, I very much appreciate that perspective. Unfortunately, we are near the end of our time, but I wanted to give you a chance, any of you, to augment what you have said, or if there's anything we haven't had a chance to discuss, or any closing remarks you might care to make. And this will start in reverse order with David.
Sure. So Rao, I'm not exactly sure what you think I said, but it's. I think the key thing here is we should have a discussion that's informed at all times, right? So we should have discussions like this. I think this is tremendously important, and I thank you for organizing this because I think this is fantastic. Where are we today? What can AI do today? And today, you know, we're nowhere close to the point where we can replace humans, right? Like it's very much. And there are limitations to what we have, and there are places you shouldn't deploy AI, and there are places where you can get great social good from deploying AI. So we should constantly ask ourselves, what can AI do today, and how can that work best for us? And if we keep that guide star, that we're constantly asking those questions, what does it really do? What are its limitations? Let's not get caught up in hype. Let's not get ahead of ourselves and hype either good or bad. You know, it's not as scary as some people seem to think it is, but at the same time, it's not as sort of magically powerful as some people seem to think it is. Getting a really nuanced view, and I think that's going to require people in policy to really become experts in technology. So, you know, sorry to the liberal arts majors of the world, like but you know, we absolutely can do it, and it's powerful, and I think the fact that you're showing this interest and this curiosity is exactly the right thing. Just kind of have that nuanced view and just keep asking those questions, and then together I think we can do something really great with AI.
Thank you. And so a couple of thoughts just to expand on that. I think that we do need to all come together to make sure to shape the development of AI to be human-centered and trustworthy. That will require a multidisciplinary conversation, not just liberal arts, all technologists, policymakers, academics, civil society, business, health experts, manufacturing, retailer. Everybody really needs to be at the table to have that informed and nuanced discussion before any regulation. And to that point, I also want to acknowledge the FCC and USG's help in the recent ITU Plenipotentiary Conference, you know, in terms of being able to address, you know, conversations in AI at the global level.
Very much appreciate that. And Rao, anything in closing?
Thank you. So just 2 points. One is, I think Carolyn was asking me earlier, and also you brought up about negative perceptions of AI and whether public is too worried about AI. Actually, I think there are two problems. One is either people are too worried about AI or too happy about AI. Okay, I think we talked enough about too worried about AI. I think if any time you think AI can do lots and lots of things, pat yourself, basically wake yourself up and realize that the technology is not where it is. Humans have an example closure tendencies. If somebody can do integration in calculus, you assume that they can do differentiation, they can do multiplication, they can do addition, subtraction, because that's how the humans doing the integration are. But I can give you a machine which can do integration and does nothing else. And it's extremely important to understand that. Just to give you an example of that, I was in Chile last week, and then so I tweeted saying, Veni, Vidi, Vici, Chile. And a certain high-profile company's translator translated that as, I saw you in Chile. Okay. Okay. You can find out which that company is by going to my Twitter. But I think it's very important to have a balanced look on the technology and not be essentially being prey to these extremes. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for sharing your expertise, and I think the folks who are in the audience will agree that we are very much beneficiaries of your knowledge and look forward to applying it, not just on the next panel, but in future discussions. So thank you so much for taking time away from your busy schedules to share your knowledge with us, and we will very much appreciate it. So if you could give them a hand.